Hi, my name is Dan Courtney. A few years ago I created a video called The Physics of God. You'll see the link for it below in the description. This video was made to challenge Frank Turek's notion of God as powerful in concert with several other attributes that Frank associated with God. Recently, a gentleman with the YouTube name Beetle Man saw that video and suggested a debate on the subject of God as powerful. What we've agreed to is a series of video exchanges. I've linked to Beetle Man's first response as well below, and this video, which I'm making now, will be my first rebuttal. I suspect this will go back and forth a few times, then I'll put everything together in one video. So, if you want to follow along, you may want to watch those other two videos first before watching this one. Or, if you prefer, you can just come back when it's all put together in one neat package. I think maybe we should back up and define our terms so that we're not actually talking past each other. Power, as a noun, has two meanings. First, it's the ability to do something. In a technical sense, as I noted in my original video, this is expressed as work per unit of time. The second meaning has to do with influence. In this sense, we mean creating some type of emotional response through flattery or threat or even some reasoned argument. But this second meaning simply isn't sufficient to account for the notion of God as being powerful. Because even if I were to concede that God could somehow influence our behavior, it doesn't account for the ability of God to do anything on his own. For example, God is said to have parted the Red Sea. Now, did God threaten the sea to influence its behavior? No, of course not. We're talking about physically moving the water, and that's the technical definition of power, work over time. Now, Beetle Man has also made a foray into a dualistic argument in his previous response by saying that we could simply calculate God's power when he's said to have stopped the sun, for example, by noting the mass, speed, etc., and, quote, I don't see what's an issue with that, unquote. Well, the issue is, of course, exactly the problem I brought up in the first place. How does a spaceless, timeless, immaterial God figure into any event that requires space, time, and material? But I don't need to defeat this dualistic argument. Beetle Man actually does it for me by recognizing, quote, you could just bring up the interaction problem, unquote. Well, I agree. And he goes on to state that the interaction problem is one reason that he's not a dualist. Okay, neither am I. So why waste time with an argument that neither of us is making? He also mentions William Lane Craig's notion that God became temporal at the creation. Okay, Dr. Craig does think that, but if you want to see Dr. Craig's arguments lying in ruins, then watch his debate with Sean Carroll. But again, Beetle Man is not making Dr. Craig's argument. He doesn't even think he's right. So why bring it up? Well, maybe it's because Beetle Man and I don't have any common ground upon which he could even make an argument. Right from the beginning, he describes himself as a, quote, anti-realist, a form of structuralist about reality, unquote. In other words, he doesn't believe that the material world is fundamental and that there is no objective reality except perhaps as it applies to relationships among concepts. Now, I'm not a philosopher, and so I'm not qualified to give any kind of detailed refutation of anti-realism or structuralism, but Beetle Man does give us a clue as to how he came to hold these positions. As I mentioned previously, Beetle Man rejects dualism, in part because of the interaction problem. But instead of taking the more parsimonious route in concluding that the material world is the objective reality and the spiritual, or he might say conceptual, world is an illusion, Beetle Man does exactly the opposite. He holds that the spiritual or conceptual world is in fact foundational reality. In my view, this is throwing out the baby and keeping the bathwater. But if you want to hold on to a notion of God, while acknowledging the interaction problem, then maybe this is actually a good way to do it. But when it comes to dealing with the physical material world and ideas like power, Well, anti-realists simply aren't, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but they're not dealing with reality in a way that makes refuting my original argument even possible. Consider the following quote from Beetle Man.
Because I would say that the concept of power only has relevance in how we interpret a particular structure of reality. And because God all structures are an extension of God's mind intimately, they're the same substance, so God can interact with any structure in his own mind as easily as we can interact with any structure in our own mind by just, thinking of certain things, conceiving of one thing and another thing, blah, blah, blah. And so God can have intimate causal interaction with his own mind, obviously, because he is his own mind.
Yes, power, as I've used the term, is in fact a description of an aspect of reality. But to claim that this reality, or what he calls a particular structure of reality, is an extension of God's mind is an unwarranted assertion. He further undermines his claim by declaring that these structures are the same, quote, substance, unquote. Substance is the very opposite of a concept, and therefore the comment contradicts itself. God, in this view, is not only a disembodied mind, but would himself only be conceptual. Here you have concepts creating concepts, which are in turn interpreted by concepts, all the while disavowing what we clearly know, that concepts, and even the mind itself, is simply a description of what the brain does, a physical, material brain. But even within Beetle Man's anti-realist and structuralist position, the concept of a mind must hold some relationship to a brain, even if that brain, according to Beetle Man, is itself only conceptual. And whether you are an anti-realist or a materialist, brains are understood in relationship to space and time, which takes us right back to power in my original argument. A spaceless and timeless entity simply contradicts the notion of powerful. So I don't know how far this conversation will go, but I do welcome a follow-up from Beetle Man. And let me add that I do admire him for stepping forward and being willing to have a dialogue on this subject. Thanks.